Once again, we return to the Besorah, part 12. Yeshua deals with leadership challenges. Last Shabbat, we considered how Yeshua travelled through the coastal towns of Zor and Sidon before heading inland to Caesarea Philippi and on to Mount Hermon, where he was involved in the Transfiguration. While in Caesarea Philippi, Yeshua asked the 12, "What people say about me? Tell me, what do they say? Who do they say I am?" The 12 responded by saying, "Some say Yochanan the Immerser, but others say Elijah, and still others say some prophet from long ago who has arisen." None of them mentioned his Messiahship. So then he asks them, "But what do you say? Who do you say I am?" Only Kefa answered, "The Messiah of God." In response, Yeshua said, "Shimon bar Yochanan, how blessed are you, for no human being has revealed this to you. No, it was from my Father in heaven." He went on by saying, "I also tell you that you are Kefa, which means rock, and on this rock I will build my community, and the gates of Sheol will not overcome it. I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven." The Father in heaven had revealed whom he wanted to become the leader of the 12 emissaries. Receiving proof from his Father, Yeshua bestowed upon Shimon the new title of Kefa. Then he ordered them to tell nobody what he was about to say. Then he shared with them about the future by saying, "The Son of Man has to endure much suffering and be rejected by the elders and the head Kohanim, the Torah teachers, and he will be put to death. But on the third day he will be raised to life." However, looking at Matthew chapter 17, verse 23, their response was they were filled with sadness. They did not understand what he meant. So on the journey back to Capernaum, the 12 argued with each other about who should have the leading role in this close-knit community. Because the three present at the Transfiguration failed to heed Yeshua's warning about telling no one, it sparked an argument between the others as to who was the greatest among them. Now did Yeshua intend that the three should withhold their experience and not share it with the other 9 emissaries? It certainly appears that was the way that Yeshua was he really wanting secrets with his own immediate community? Yeshua knew what had happened if the 3 told the other 9. So it was right that they keep silent at that stage, at least until he had announced publicly about his death and resurrection. The 3 were privy to something that was very special, and by sharing it, it caused problems. So having arrived back in Capernaum, it appears that they went straight to Kefa's house, where Yeshua put an end to that argument by saying in Mark chapter 9, verse 35, "If anyone wants to be first, he must make himself the last and be a servant of all." So the die was cast. Shimon, now known as Kefa, was to be their leader, but he still had an awful lot to learn, as we will see as we go through the various events as they unfold, while the date of Yeshua's death was drawing closer. While they were in Capernaum, in Matthew 17:24, it tells about Kefa being challenged by a temple tax collector who asked, "Doesn't your rabbi pay a temple tax?" That is a strange way of asking a simple question. But Kefa answered by saying, "Of course he does." Then upon returning home, Yeshua challenged Kefa about his response to the tax collector, saying, "Shimon, what is your opinion? The kings of the earth, from whom do they collect duties and taxes? From their sons or from others?" Kefa boldly answered, "From others, as the sons are exempt." Clearly, Kefa had failed to realize the significance of the words that he himself had spoken at Caesarea Philippi just a few days earlier. On that occasion, he said about Yeshua, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." So as the Son of God, Yeshua did not have to pay temple tax. But Kefa had been tricked. Yet again, through the words of the tax collector, the adversary had used the tax collector and used his words in a way that caught Kefa totally off guard by asking a negative question. Doesn't your rabbi pay the temple tax? That is the same subtle type of questioning that Satan used through the serpent in the garden when he challenged Adam and Hawa. Did God really say you are not to eat from any of the trees in the garden? After all, rabbis did have to pay temple tax. So Kefa was right. Yeshua, as a rabbi, was responsible for paying his tax. But as the Messiah, he was not under obligation to pay that tax. Through the tax collectors, Satan again tried to expose Yeshua's real identity as the Messiah by using a tricky question. However, the way Yeshua dealt with Kefa's mistake, as revealed in verse 27, speaks volumes. To avoid offending them, go to the lake, throw out a line, and take the first fish you catch. Open its mouth, and you will find a shekel. Take it and give it to them, for me and for you. So Yeshua used very subtle tactics to outsmart the adversary and managed to avert, again, a direct challenge to Yeshua's authority and identity. Even though on two previous occasions Yeshua's Father in heaven had actually recognized him by saying, "This is my Son with whom I am well pleased." But Yeshua had still not been given full authority in heaven and on earth. The final confirmation of his authority did not occur until he ascended to the presence of his Father on the day after his resurrection, when on the day of Bikurim that following year, having been raised the previous afternoon, he was given full authority both in heaven and on earth. However, at the time when Kefa was questioned by the tax collector, Yeshua was still under the authority of the Torah and the temple taxes. Therefore, as their rabbi, he was obligated to pay that temple tax. But as a son of God, he was not under that obligation. However, by providing Kefa with a whole shekel, he sidestepped the adversary's challenges yet again. Through that whole experience, Kefa learned a powerful lesson about the ways in which Satan tries to coerce ones who've been called to be leaders, and how mistakes can be made because the leader is unaware of the tactics that are actually being used. That example serves as a constant reminder to us just how Satan can turn a perfectly normal Torah principle into a means by which he can trip up even people in the Messianic community. Another very important feature of the adversary's tactics is that he often works through members within the Messianic community itself by applying subtle words which trip us up more often than not. Moving on, again we see that around that time Yeshua was forced to withdraw from public view. This time it was because Herod the Great's son, who was at that time the regional governor in the Galil, sent his attendants to inquire about Yeshua with the accusations of Matthew 14:2, saying that he must be Yochanan the Immerser who has been raised from the dead. That is why these miraculous powers are working within him. So doubtless he was worried that if Yochanan had been raised from death, then his reign and even his life were both in jeopardy. When Yeshua became aware that Herod was seeking to kill him, he left by boat and sailed away to the wilderness and the southeastern shores of the lake. However, the people soon learned that he'd departed. So a large crowd followed him on foot round the lake shore. Then in verse 14, when he stepped ashore, he saw a huge crowd. Filled with compassion, he healed those among them who were sick. Having spent a whole day with them, as evening approached, he fed that crowd of 5,000, as recorded in Matthew 14 verses 15 to 21. After feeding them, he sent the crowd away on foot and dispatched the 12 by boat, while he went up into the hills by himself to pray to his Father. Now, around about 4 o'clock in the morning, the boat was still battling with a strong northeasterly wind and rough seas. Then out of the night, Yeshua appeared, walking on the water. At first, the 12 thought they had seen a ghost and began to scream with fear. But then, in verse 27, Yeshua spoke to them and said, "Have courage." He said, "It is I. Stop being afraid." And then once again, it was Kefa who was the first to react to the situation by crying out to Yeshua, "Master, if it is really you, tell me to come to you on the water." In response, Yeshua gave one of his classic one-word answers, "Come." Kefa leapt out of the boat and began walking towards the Master. But just as quickly, he realized the gravity of his impulsive action and began to sink. He yelled to the Master, "Save me!" Yeshua immediately stretched out his hand, took hold of him, and said to him, "Such little trust. Why did you doubt?" Verse 32 concludes the whole event with both back in the boat, and the sea was calmed. But overwhelmed by what had happened, the other 11 exclaimed, "You truly are the Son of God." In this situation, we have seen yet again how little the 12 really understood about their Master, and particularly Kefa, who had taken the leap of faith, suddenly lost his trust while he was being tossed around in the waves. The wind having dropped and the waves having settled, they continued on their original heading towards the western shore to a place called Gennesaret, which is situated halfway between Capernaum and Magdala. They must have arrived probably around about dawn, because Matthew says in 14:35, when the people of the place recognized him, they sent word throughout the neighborhood and brought to him everyone who was ill. They begged him that the sick people might touch his tzitzit on his robe, so that all who touched would be completely healed. So began yet another cycle of healing. And turning to the Gospel of Yochanan, or John, chapter 6, we read there another version of the feeding of the large crowd of people, which reflects fairly closely the account in the 3 synoptic Gospels. However, Yochanan is the only one who gives us a clue to the timing of that event. In Yochanan chapter 6 verse 4, It has been perhaps one of the most controversial verses in the four gospel narratives, because Yochanan's saying in verse 4, now the Judean festival of Pesach was coming up. Now, I have written extensively on our webpage and in the essay Yeshua's Ministry, which gives a chronological snapshot of how the Judean festival spoken about in that verse could not be Pesach. Yochanan, chapter 6, verse 4, must be considered along with the sequence of other festivals that are also recorded in the same gospel. Only by considering each of the festivals can we see how the real chronological sequence matches perfectly with the cycle of festivals found in Torah. Torah states that 3 times each year all men of Israel were to go to Yerushalayim to observe the specified agricultural festivals at the appointed times of Yahweh, which, of course, is what Yeshua and his emissaries always did. Those 3 festivals are mentioned in Shemot, Exodus, chapter 23, then again in Shemot, chapter 34, and finally in Devarim, or Deuteronomy, chapter 16, where Yahweh spells out how those 3 appointed times were to be observed when he says, 3 times a year all the men are to appear in the presence of Yahweh, your God, in the place that he will choose. At the festivals of Matzah, Pesach, at the festival of Shavuot, and the festival of Sukkot. So when we compare that cycle alongside the 3 festivals referenced in Yochanan's Gospel, we see the chronological pattern of Yeshua's ministry and how it is centered around those 3 festivals. However, the Gospel of Yochanan is the only one that gives us a clear path through the agricultural year of Torah. Starting in Yochanan chapter 2 verse 13, he says, it was almost time for the festival of Pesach in Yehuda. So Yeshua went up to Yerushalayim. That was the festival that occurred just a few days after Yeshua had turned the water into wine, which was, of course, his first miracle. After spending a few days in Capernaum with his family, he travelled up to Yerushalayim to celebrate that Pesach. Then in chapter 5, verse 1, Yochanan says, after this there was a Judean festival, and Yeshua went up to Yerushalayim. And that was the second agricultural festival in the cycle, which, according to Torah, of course, was Shavuot. Then we come to Yochanan chapter 6, verse 4, which is yet another Judean festival. But it says there, Yochanan does not say that Yeshua went up to Yerushalayim. Instead, as we have seen, he spent the day on the far side of the lake Kinneret, feeding the multitude. But clearly, the Judean festival could not be one of those 3 agricultural festivals, as both Yeshua and his emissaries, along with his audience, would all been travelling towards the festival in Yerushalayim. So having been to Yerushalayim for both Pesach in 29 CE, and then 50 days later for Shavuot in that same year, the next festival would be Sukkot, which of course would fall in the fall or autumn of 29 CE. So having spent 6 months travelling around the Galil, Yeshua had taught and healed in many different places. During the first phase, between Pesach and Shavuot, he had spent most of his time in and around the southern regions of the Galil, while in the second phase, he spent more time in the northern regions. But all the time he had been teaching and healing, he was preparing those 12 emissaries and the people for what lay ahead. His greatest challenge was to warn the people about what they were to expect in the future with his death and resurrection. But all the while, he had to also be very careful how he spoke, because the adversary took every opportunity possible to reveal who he was and to bring an untimely end to his messianic ministry. Another major challenge Yeshua experienced was when twice he visited his own hometown, Nazareth, where on both occasions he was rejected by the townsfolk because they did not want to hear or accept the message about their need to turn back to Yahweh and Torah. So just as Kefa had many lessons to learn, Yeshua also had his own struggles with the many challenges from the rabbinic establishment and his constant rejection by the Judean authorities, who were all acting, of course, as agents of Satan. Yet, just as he overcame all the setbacks and challenges, Yeshua also provided the much-needed guidance for Kefa, who was also working through many personal leadership issues during his journey through the Galil with Yeshua. The second phase of Yeshua's journey through the Galil was drawing to its natural end. And once again, it was time for them to head to Yerushalayim. This time, of course, it was Sukkot, 29 CE. However, as they were preparing for that final departure from Galil, Yeshua announced that he would not be going to that festival of Sukkot. As Yochanan, in chapter 7, verse 1 to 4 says, Yeshua had travelled all around the Galil, intentionally avoiding Yehuda, because the Judeans were out to kill him. As the festival of Sukkot in Yehuda was near, his brothers said to him, "Leave here and go to Yehuda, so that your Talmudim can see the miracles that you do. For no one who wants to become known acts in secret. If you're doing these things, show yourself to the world." Now those were the comments of his earthly half-brothers, who at that stage were again challenging him to reveal himself before as many people as possible. However, their challenge was again driven by the adversary, because once again the adversary was attempting to force Yeshua to expose his real identity and purpose ahead of the due time. If he had coerced Yeshua into going to that festival, it is most likely that he would have been arrested by the Judean authorities. But, as we're told later, the time for his death and resurrection had to coincide with Pesach, which of course was part of God's sovereign plan. However, if the adversary could get him to the Sukkot festival, he could have Yeshua quietly killed by the authorities, and the plan of God would be destroyed. However, Yochanan continues on in chapter 7, verses 6 through 9, where Yeshua responds to his half-brothers by who was challenging him by saying, "My time has not yet come, but for you any time is right. The world cannot hate you, but it does hate me, because I keep telling it how wicked its ways really are. You go on up to the festival. As for me, I'm not going up to the festival now, because the right time for me has not yet come." Having said this, he stayed on in the Galil. Knowing what confronted him, Yeshua was wise to remain in the Galil. As Yochanan continues in verses 10 through 13, after his brothers had gone up to the festival, he too went up, not publicly, but in secret. At the festival, the Judeans were looking for him. "Where is he?" they asked. And among the crowds, there was much whispering about him. Some said he's a good man, but others said he is out to deceive the masses. However, no one spoke about him openly for fear of those Judeans. So next Shabbat, we will join Yeshua in Yerushalayim in time for the 7th day of Sukkot, which of course is known as Hoshana Rabbah, the day of the water libation. And we will see how he, yet again, will be challenged by those authorities. But we'll wait till next Shabbat to find out what happens. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.